Um, so there's news today that the former British Prime Minister Gordon Brown has stepped down as an MP, Member of Parliament, after 32 years in Westminster. That's a long political career and obviously an accomplished one. Very, very few members of Parliament managed to get to number 10. Of course, he succeeded Tony Blair, and it wasn't a case that he was elected to that position. So, if for the American audience, try and think of Gerald Ford, that would be the equivalent. I just want to talk a little bit about Brown, but also some of the implications of how Brown is perceived. Now, firstly, I want to make clear I don't regard Brown as a great Prime Minister. So this video should not be seen as sort of apologist in the sense that I am not trying to make Brown something that he's not. Gordon Brown was never a great Prime Minister. However, I am convinced that as I look at his legacy today, and what prompted me to make this is that the current leader of the Labour Party, Ed Miliband, has just put a post about it, and Ed Miliband seems to be going through the same treatment by the Murdoch press. I met Gordon Brown about 7 years ago now, when he was still Chancellor of the Exchequer. In fact, in the final months he was Chancellor of the Exchequer. He was opening something in Gateshead, and my father had some connection to that. It was some sort of trade union event. I forget exactly the place he was opening, but anyway, I had the opportunity to briefly meet him. Now, I've always seen Brown as a man of conviction. I've always seen Brown as someone who had very good values and who tried his level best to meet those values in his political life. Was he a great Prime Minister? No. And he will never be seen as a great Prime Minister. He made some very fundamental mistakes. One of the biggest was not calling an election shortly after he got elected, because he would have won anyway. But I am convinced that he was in for a rough ride from the start. Even if Brown had had an election and been democratically elected, the Murdoch press would still have given him a hard time, because he was more to the left than Blair, and it just didn't fit into their agenda. And this is exactly what they're doing with Ed Miliband now, and I really hate it. The reason I hate it is because it is not an asset to democracy, it is actually a hindrance to democracy. We need a free press to scrutinise those in power, that's entirely legitimate. But when you get a situation where, and this is somewhat related to the last video I made on the media, when you get a situation whereby a powerful media body, in this case the Murdoch press, just for outside viewers, what I'm talking about is newspapers owned by the Australian tycoon Rupert Murdoch, who's a very, very powerful man in Britain. And those papers are very influential because they are the best read papers in the country. They can literally make or break a general election. I think that Murdoch and his media empire has far too much influence. Now, just to be clear, I do believe in a strong independent press, but what we have with the Murdoch media is not an independent press. You have a press with vested political interests, and they are hell-bent on basically slandering Labour leaders. That's what they're doing right now with Ed Miliband. Red Ed, they keep calling him. And they pillory him over the stupidest things, i.e. he was eating a sandwich, and they lambasted that for weeks on end as if it was an important issue, because they took one photograph where he looked slightly, let's say, it was an unsavoury photograph. But you take a picture of anybody in a certain position, they're going to look a little bit unusual. Now, take for example a freeze frame of this video, me saying something. You could take a freeze frame of this and I would look unusual. In fact, sometimes I put thumbnails on my videos and I think, oh, I look a bit strange there. So that's how I see this. Now, I have no problem with papers critiquing policies. I think that's legitimate. And it is very important that people in power are scrutinised in a democratic country. But what you have with the Murdoch press is something that is way beyond that. So instead of being remembered for his tireless work on international development and human rights, this is something that not many people know. Gordon Brown has worked tirelessly on education. For example, education access for girls in countries like Pakistan and Nigeria. In fact, Brown went into Nigeria to try and help release Chibok schoolgirls. And I just think it's very sad that when a man has devoted so much of his life to positive goals, he is only remembered for ridiculous reasons and for being a weak Prime Minister. And this is not to say that Brown didn't make mistakes. And this is nothing to do with, this is not meant to be an analysis of Brown's premiership. You know, he may well be a weak Prime Minister, he may well be seen as one of our least effective Prime Ministers. But I just think this personal character assassination is unfortunate. And by the way, I'm not biased in this regard, because I would make the same accusation against the Daily Mirror in terms of how they constantly attack David Cameron. They do the same thing. I mean, the Daily Mirror seems to have a crusade against Cameron on a personal basis, not about his policies, but on a personal basis. That's not journalism, that's just tacky, low-blow rubbish. But then what more do you expect of the tabloid press? I do think it is important for any newspaper, any media source to scrutinise those in power, but we just have a situation that is unfortunate. Another example, the whole Plebgate row. I was going to make a video on this individually, but I thought it wasn't. I didn't think I should do that, because I thought it would only be adding fuel to the fire. And what is really, I thought that was a classic example of a non-story becoming a very big story when it really shouldn't have been a story at all. Basically, to summarise, a senior member of the cabinet, the chief whip, about 2 years ago was alleged to have used derogatory words towards a police officer at the entrance to Downing Street. He called the man a pleb. Now this went on and on and on. It ended up in a libel case. Andrew Mitchell, that's the minister involved, countersued the Sun for libel, and he's lost, and now he may have to pay up to, as I understand it, 2 million in legal costs. This just seems completely ridiculous. Now, I don't know who's telling the truth and who's not, but it seems disgraceful that it's been allowed to go this far, and in part, I blame the Police Federation for letting it go this far. Now, it's not that I think a government minister should be using that language. If he did say that, it's disgraceful and it is snobbery, but I still don't think it should be as big a story as it is. The way I see it is that may well have been an example of him having a long day and not handling it very well. And how many of us lose our temper after maybe a stressful day at work? Now, I'm not condoning what he said, but I just think there are bigger issues. And I think it's so classically British for such a stupid issue to become such a big thing. So I think the Police Federation really wasted public money on that. But the reason I mention that is, from now on, Andrew Mitchell is going to be remembered for Plebgate. In other words, for losing his temper and making a rude comment. Instead of being remembered as a government minister who actually served as a UN peacekeeper. Now, just to be clear, this is not about personally liking Andrew Mitchell or not. I don't know the man. For all I know, he might be an unpleasant character. It's about the implications of how the media slander politicians, and they do. And I'm fed up with it. Now, people might say my position's hypocritical because I made a video about Gordon Ramsay. Just to be clear, I'm not saying that anybody is above criticism. So if Andrew Mitchell did say that, it's wrong. It's unprofessional, he shouldn't say it. But what I just think there's an inconsistency. Why is it we accept someone like Gordon Ramsay spouting out rubbish, and yet when a politician shows the slightest flaw, he or she is utterly pilloried? Another example is a Labour MP, shadow cabinet member in fact, who tweeted a picture of a house in North London, and it showed a white van and an English flag. Now, she didn't say anything derogatory. That became a huge issue, and she had to step down from her position. I just think that is another example of the media stirring things out of proportion. Now, I think there is a place for satire, and I have no problem with satirists looking at these situations, but I think we need to get some sort of balance as to what is really important and what is not. And most of these issues are not important. Let's stick to the real important issues.